The reality in Pittsburgh right now is that everything revolves around one decision, and that decision is Mike McCarthy. Not as a headline, not as a slogan, but as a very deliberate choice that tells you exactly how the Steelers see themselves in this moment. This wasn't about age, optics, or chasing the next trendy profile. It was about fit, timing, and trust in proven NFL substance. When you strip away the noise, the Steelers hired Mike McCarthy for the same reason they hired Chuck Noll, Bill Kowar, and Mike Tomlin. They believed he was the best coach for the job when the job needed to be filled. Nothing more complicated than that. There's been a lot of talk among fans about long-term potential, about why not go younger, about why not try to recreate some imaginary template of a first-time head coach with upside. But history tells a different story. When Chuck Noll was hired, nobody was talking about how long he might stay. The same goes for Kowar and Tomlin. Longevity was never the selling point. Competence, leadership, and readiness were. The idea that the Steelers follow a rigid coaching blueprint is mostly myth. If Joe Paterno had accepted Dan Rooney's offer back in 1969, the entire narrative of what a Steelers head coach looks like would be completely different today. Mike McCarthy arrives with credentials that are hard to dismiss if you're being honest about the league. 174 regular season wins, a .608 winning percentage, a Super Bowl ring, and decades spent on the offensive side of the ball developing quarterbacks who actually won games. That resume matters to an organization that believes windows are real and that timing is everything. The Steelers didn't look at McCarthy and see a short-term placeholder. They saw someone who has navigated the pressures of the job, who understands locker rooms, and who has been responsible for building functional, winning offenses at the highest level. And while the coaching hire dominates the conversation, it's not happening in a vacuum. There's a broader organizational rhythm already underway. McCarthy isn't rushing players back into the building just to be seen doing something. He has been clear about his belief that veteran players need time to decompress after the season grind. That tells you a lot about his approach. Behind the scenes, the real work is already happening. Assembling a staff, laying out evaluations, preparing for the NFL Combine, balancing free agency planning with draft preparation, all with the knowledge that the 2026 NFL Draft will be held in Pittsburgh from April 23 to April 25th. That timeline isn't theoretical. It's concrete, and it's driving every decision being made right now. This offseason also brings individual storylines that matter more than they might seem at first glance. Chris Boswell, for example, is entering the final year of the extension he signed in 2022. He's eligible for another extension, and all signs point toward that happening. From McCarthy's perspective, it would make little sense not to secure an in-his-prime kicker who has converted 87% of his field goal attempts, produced 7 100-point seasons, and sits just 88 points away from becoming the franchise's all-time leading scorer. That's not just stability, that's legacy-level production at a critical position. On offense, there are questions that won't be answered by slogans or wishful thinking. Roman Wilson's situation is a perfect example. Whatever caused him to fade into the background over his first 2 seasons is now largely irrelevant. The system is different. The staff is different. The expectations are reset. What matters now is opportunity and response. He's a third-year pro with a clean slate, and whether he becomes a viable no 2 or no 3 wide receiver is entirely on him. Then there's the quarterback conversation, which refuses to go away. Comparisons to Sam Darnold's resurgence in Seattle have led some fans to suggest taking flyers on former high picks like Anthony Richardson or Zach Wilson. But that kind of thinking ignores context. Reclamation projects aren't interchangeable parts. Betting on a quarterback who entered the league as a top selection is not the same as adding a camp arm. Even with McCarthy's reputation for quarterback development, not every situation is a carbon copy. That's why, when forced to choose between uncertainty and proven experience, the preference expressed internally leans towards someone like Aaron Rodgers for another year rather than gambling on a one-size-fits-all revival story. Even the emotional debates around the league, like Bill Belichick not being a first-ballot Hall of Fame selection, offer perspective. First-ballot status doesn't define greatness. History is full of legendary coaches who didn't get in on the first try. And eventually, the substance always outweighs the timing. Elections, after all, reflect voters as much as candidates. All of this paints a picture of a franchise that isn't panicking, isn't chasing validation, and isn't rebuilding its identity. The Steelers are making calculated decisions rooted in experience, history, and a belief that the present matters just as much as the future. Mike McCarthy is the centerpiece of that belief, not because of what he might become, but because of what he already is. Now the question shifts from why the Steelers chose him to how this choice reshapes everything that follows. And that's where this story really starts to get interesting. What do you think this hire truly says about where the Steelers believe they are right now? What makes this moment even more fascinating fascinating is how it quietly forces Steelers Nation to look inward, not at rivals, not at league trends, but at expectations. For years, the debate around Pittsburgh has circled the same themes: stability versus evolution, patience versus urgency, tradition versus adaptation. The McCarthy hire doesn't blow up those debates, but it reframes them. It tells you the organization believes the foundation is still solid enough to support an experienced architect rather than a developmental experiment. That perspective shows up again when you zoom out and look at how the Steelers historically evaluate success and failure. There's a reason the franchise doesn't obsess over labels like first ballot or next big thing. Whether it's a Hall of Fame discussion or a coaching hire, the Steelers have always leaned towards substance over symbolism. The idea that Bill Belichick not being a first ballot Hall of Famer somehow diminishes his career is a perfect parallel. Once you're in, you're in. Once you win, you've won. Timing and perception fade, results don't. That same mindset applies here. McCarthy's age, the noise around his previous stops, or the online reaction don't change what he's accomplished or what he's capable of bringing into the building right now. There's also an undercurrent of accountability running through all of this. Fresh starts are being handed out, but they're not free passes. Roman Wilson's situation highlights that clearly. The past 2 seasons didn't define him as much as they limited him. With a new offensive system and a new voice leading it, excuses disappear. Opportunity increases, but so does responsibility. That theme extends beyond one player. Every position group is about to be evaluated through a different lens. And that's often where real change happens, not in splashy transactions, but in daily standards. The same applies to the quarterback room conversation. Fans love the idea of transformation stories, but the Steelers' internal tone remains pragmatic. Sam Darnold's success in Seattle doesn't automatically translate elsewhere, and assuming it does, undervalues how specific circumstances need to be for those turnarounds to work. That's why the discussion gravitates toward proven paths instead of hypothetical ones. It's not about refusing creativity, it's about respecting risk. A quarterback decision defines seasons, careers, and sometimes entire coaching tenures. McCarthy understands that better than most, which is why patience and clarity matter more than headlines. Even the way McCarthy is approaching the early calendar says a lot. There's no rush to parade activity for public consumption. The process is methodical. Finalize the coaching staff, prepare for the combine, align free agency strategy with draft priorities, and build toward a draft that will take place on Pittsburgh soil. Hosting the 2026 NFL Draft isn't just a logistical detail. It's symbolic. The league will be watching, and the Steelers know exactly how they want to present themselves when that moment arrives. And let's not overlook how key veterans fit into this picture. Chris Boswell's situation is a reminder that continuity still matters. In a league where margins are razor thin, having a reliable, productive kicker entering his prime isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. For a head coach trying to establish rhythm and confidence, those details add up quickly. Winning organizations protect their strengths, and Boswell has quietly been one of Pittsburgh's most consistent ones. All of this leads to a bigger truth that might not be comfortable for everyone. The Steelers are not chasing approval. They're chasing alignment. Alignment between experience and opportunity, between roster reality and coaching philosophy, between patience and urgency. Mike McCarthy is not a reset button. He's a recalibration. The franchise isn't saying the past failed, it's saying the present requires something specific, and they believe they've chosen it. That's why this hire can't be judged in a vacuum or reduced to a single season projection. It's a signal about how the Steelers intend to compete, how they define leadership, and how much they value proven NFL understanding when the stakes are high. Whether fans agree or disagree, the direction is clear, and now it becomes about execution. What hasn't been talked about enough is how this entire stretch is going to test the relationship between the Steelers and their fan base more than any single win-loss record. Because this is one of those inflection points where expectations collide with patience. The organization is clearly signaling that it believes competitiveness is still very much alive, not something to be rebuilt from scratch. That belief shapes everything, from coaching philosophy to roster decisions to how risks are evaluated. Mike McCarthy stepping in also changes the internal power dynamics in subtle ways. Veteran voices in the locker room now have a head coach who has been through championship runs, playoff failures, locker room fractures, and rebuild attempts. That experience tends to cut through noise fast. When McCarthy talks about preparation, about situational football, about discipline and execution, it's not theory, it's lived experience. Players know the difference, and that matters when buy-in becomes the difference between a good season and a wasted one. This also puts pressure on the front office to stay aligned. A coach with McCarthy's background isn't here to babysit a long-term experiment, he's here to maximize what's available. That means roster spots become more competitive, roles become more clearly defined, and development becomes less abstract. You either fit what's being built or you don't. For younger players, that can be uncomfortable. For veterans, it can be clarifying. And for Steelers Nation, this is where the real tension lives. Some fans want patience and vision. Others want urgency and results. The truth is, the Steelers are trying to walk the line between both. They're not ignoring the future, but they're also refusing to waste the present. That's a harder path than a full rebuild because it leaves no room for excuses. Every decision is judged immediately, and every misstep feels amplified. That's why this offseason matters more than it might look on the surface. It's not just about one coach or one contract or one draft. It's about whether this version of the Steelers can prove that stability and adaptability don't have to be opposites. McCarthy's presence is the bet that they can coexist and that experience can still drive progress in a league obsessed with novelty. Another layer to this that deserves attention is how quietly the Steelers are redefining what continuity actually means. For a long time, continuity in Pittsburgh was interpreted almost exclusively as sameness. Same voices, same rhythms, same internal logic year after year. What this moment suggests is a shift toward continuity of standards rather than continuity of personnel. The standards don't change, but the messengers can. That's a meaningful distinction, and Mike McCarthy fits directly into it. McCarthy isn't coming in to reinvent what it means to be a Steeler. He's coming in to reinforce it through a lens shaped by modern NFL realities. His background as an offensive coach matters here, not because offense suddenly becomes the identity, but because it balances a franchise that has often leaned on defense and resilience to carry the load. The Steelers aren't abandoning who they are. They're trying to become harder to defend, harder to predict, and harder to out-scheme in critical moments. That's where fans need to be careful not to oversimplify what success will look like early on. This isn't about flashy statements or dramatic philosophical swings. It's about incremental clarity. Roles on offense becoming less ambiguous, situational decisions feeling less reactive, game plans reflecting a deeper understanding of opponent tendencies. These are the things that don't always jump off the screen immediately, but show up in close games, late drives, and playoff-level margins. The quarterback conversation, again, sits right at the center of that. Not because a single name solves everything, but because clarity at that position affects the entire ecosystem. Protection schemes, receiver development, play sequencing, even how defenses are forced to play you. McCarthy's history suggests he values structure and timing as much as raw talent, and that preference will shape every decision made there. That doesn't mean instant answers. It means deliberate ones. And when you zoom out even further, you start to see why the organization isn't reacting emotionally to outside criticism. The Steelers have always understood that being popular and being right are not the same thing. Fan frustration, media skepticism, and online narratives come and go. What remains is whether the internal process is sound. Everything about this hire suggests they believe it is. This stretch, more than anything, will test execution